Welcome to the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society. Welcome to ITSPmagazine. Knowledge is power, now more than ever.
And hello, everybody. You're very welcome to a new episode of Redefining CyberSecurity here on ITSP Magazine. This is Sean Martin, where I get to chat with all the cool people from around the industry and beyond to talk about tech and how it impacts business and security and risk, and how we need to bake that in to enable the business to succeed, not to block them from growth and revenue generation. And there's a lot in that all in itself, but then if you look inward as a security professional, and even more so with scrutiny from others as a CISO in a role, there is even so much more to consider. Personally, how do you deal with it? Are you able? What attributes do you need to have? What skills do you need to have? What teams do you need to build? What tech do you need to use? And then there's also the stress that comes with that, and perhaps the liabilities as well. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of that in the context of the current state of the CISO, and we're going to look at the CTO role and the CIO role, and how the CISO fits in there, and what some of the gaps are as well. Of course, not having been a CISO, I know nothing. So that's where our good guest, Sue Bergamo, comes in. How are you, Sue?
I'm good, Sean. How are you today? Thanks
I'm
for having
fabulous. It's exciting. I'm glad to have met you the other day, and thrilled to have you on the show. Hopefully, I didn't butcher your last name.
me. No, actually, you said it correctly. You're like one of just a few.
There
And
you go.
going back to Italy, there's this nice little town in northern Italy called Bergamo, Italy. So
There you go.
it is the polenta capital of the world.
Ooh, I'm gonna have to go visit that now and check it out, and taste, of course. But we can talk about food on another episode, on another show. we're gonna focus on cyber today. I'm sure I'll bring in a food analogy. It's what I do. But before we get into the all of those nits and bits, Sue, a few words about what you've been up to, what you're currently doing, and why this topic.
Well, actually, I've been talking about this topic for the better part of a year. So by trade, I'm a pattern watcher because I have to be. And I've been seeing some things that are a little disconcerting in the industry, and just trying to call them to attention. But my background is CIO. I've been CIO for 12 years. And then I went over to security about 8 years ago, which I still do CIO work, still do tech work. I think there's a misconception that you can separate the two, but they go hand in hand. No matter if you're, dealing with the engineering team or, the IT team, but security really gets their hands into everything, including the business, right? HR and finance and marketing and sales and customer support. So we're not just one shop or one topic, role. We're all over the place, and we should be.
That that might be a good place to start. Actually, I know we want to touch on some of the gaps between CIO and CTO, but given your experiences in the roles that you've had, and the trends that you're watching, and the things that you're spotting, do you feel that we have, and I don't know who even we is, with the greater we, do we have a good understanding of how the CISO role fits in relation to the CIO and the CTO, and I don't know. I guess every company does build stuff pretty much at this point. So there's technology officer or product officers as well, bringing apps to play internally or externally. So do we have a good grasp of CISO, CSO versus the other roles, and have we done a good job over the years, kind of drawing lines where they need to be, keeping them removed where they shouldn't be there?
See, I think that's part of the gap that I'm seeing. So I think that the CISO role was well intended when it first came out, and I speak from experience because as a longtime CIO, I always had security in my shop, but I have to be honest with you, not to the level that I did when I became a CISO. It's a whole different dynamic. And I really believe that CIOs asked for the help because they understood it was a whole other full time job and they were already wearing many, many hats. The CTO in more, I'm going to say mature companies have understood that, if they're developing products, that they have to be cognizant of the security around those products. But, I do think that there's a little bit of a gap right now in understanding that the CISO really is there, not just to secure the perimeter, which I think it was what everyone thought in the beginning, like just go after the network and we're fine. But we're there to find, identify, detect, and then respond to gap areas. And I think that's where some of the rub comes in right now because, if we're doing our jobs correctly, we're partnering with CIOs and CTOs, and we're not just poking them in the nose when we find a gap. But face it, when you're really busy and you've got all these priorities, on your plate as it is, and then we come in and we're like, "Whoa, you got all these exposures, and look at all this, these vulnerabilities and these defects, and all these exploits, and we're just adding to the burden on these folks' plates." And I think that's where some of the conflict comes in.
And I can't help myself but to look back on some of my own experiences when I was building products at Symantec. So different than a security program, but still a program in that you have a problem you're trying to solve or something you're trying to build over to achieve some objective. And I can't tell you the number of times that the organization reorganized how products were brought to market.
Hmm.
Sometimes they'd place a business head at the top. Sometimes they'd place a tech head at the top. Sometimes they'd place a program head at the top, depending on oftentimes kind of what the company thought was needed for the company at the time, but then also I presume sometimes down at the product at the delivery level to say this is a high risk, or this is a very technical, or this is a very time sensitive, depending on what some of the core attributes of the challenges where they might organize a team a certain way or an organization a certain way. So my question from that experience is, do you think we define the CISO role in a way that's malleable enough to fit different types of organizations and different types of scenarios, maturity levels, size, industries, scope, risk levels, team capabilities? I don't know. Your thoughts on all that stuff that I just said.
I wish I could say it was totally defined. So let me start by saying that in the MBA programs, no one teaches tech and security. It's sales, marketing, and finance. So that's the first gap, right? And then, and again, I've had a long career in IT and in security. So, these aren't rubs, these are just facts. Then you get to the board level. And again, it's mostly, investors, CEOs, right? Again, marketing, sales, and finance. Tech and security are typically not a part of the board. Now, if you're in a really big company, you may find those individuals, sitting at the board level, but for the most part, they're not there. So you have a whole bunch of business people, either if they're sitting on top of product or if they're sitting on top of a company, not really understanding what the CIO or the CISO should be doing. The CTO is very clear. They're there to get product out the door. But these other roles, just like what the CIO went through 20 years ago, they went through a lot of pain, try to figure out what it was that they should be doing. And at the end of the day, they kind of got pushed into the back corner and now they're just internal applications, which, by the way, is an important role to have. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done in order to maintain internal applications. So the CISO, sort of came out of that as an, okay, well, we're going to protect all the internal corporate affairs, the network, the internal applications, the employees. And then some CISOs got to participate and venture over into product, which is a great thing to have happen. But again, we're coming in sort of, at the end of the tail, right? The tail's already wagged and we're coming in at the end, and we're saying, but you forgot, but, right? What about, but, and people are going, wait a minute, we have been functioning all this time without you. And, like, you're coming in here like sort of like a little bit of a wet blanket saying, well, you're not doing things correctly. And so, again, if we're doing our jobs right, we're not just identifying gaps in these other areas. We're working to help resolve them, and that's really what we should be doing. And a lot of it starts, I hate to say this, it just sounds so simplistic, but it's true, with access privileges. If we get access privileges right, it's not that it takes cyber off the menu, but it at least gives you some foundation, some basis to then start building a program on top of hopefully role-based security and access privileges. Because as I like to say to, board of directors when I get a chance to talk to them, why would you give customer success access to sales numbers or HR access to finance numbers, right? Like, people should have the data that they need to do their jobs and really no more than that, right? It's the privilege of least. That's what we abide by. Meaning, if you don't need to see it, you don't have access to it, and that's a good thing. And especially lots of folks say to me, "Well, you should have access to everything because you're the CISO." And the answer is, "Oh dear God, no." Like, I'm the last person you want to give full access to, or the CEO or the CMO, because we're the most sought after person in the organization to be attacked. The CEO is the most, attacked person in any organization. But if we get compromised and we have high access privileges, it's game over for the company. So there's a lot to be done. And honestly, it starts at IAM.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes sense. And I can't help but think that as part of that, access to information, but also the system. So therefore, the networks and segmentation for me fall underneath that. That
Mhm.
may start to make things complex again, but
Well,
nonetheless, yeah.
and not to bring this up, but it just continues. Like, so there's themes every week, and this week's theme is API security, right? And connections and service accounts. I love to go into companies and say, when's the last time you guys rotated, tokens, your secret keys and your passwords on those service account IDs? And people look at me like, what are you talking about? And it's like, it's just like a user ID. You should be rotating them minimally at an annual basis at a minimum.
Yeah.
But a lot of companies don't even know where the assets are located, let alone how to go about and rotate those keys.
Exactly.
You're laughing. It's
So,
true.
no, I know. I can sadly picture a few myself that I'm thinking, oh yeah. I remember. The good thing is I remember some that I've set up that I could follow this advice for. But to your other point, there were probably others that
And hopefully you didn't hard code any of them, right?
didn't use. Yeah. So exactly, and I didn't put them in GitHub, the keys as well. That's just another point. But this is all fun as well. But I want to talk about. I think what you just described clearly. Well, I don't know, maybe not clearly. I want to talk about responsibility because you talked about CIO and CTO and then the bringing of security in, and there's handing off activities. There's handing off uh, requirements and jobs and things like that. And then there's the responsibility part. And I'm wondering your thoughts on, well, what from the CIO or the CTO were handed off as tasks, and what things were handed off as responsibilities. And I guess I'm asking a bit of kind of an organizational structure, who sits at the top and who maintains the responsibility. We haven't talked about risk managers or risk officers. yet as a label, but somehow they fit in there as well if the organization is big enough. So I don't know if you can paint a picture of the different roles and where the difference between activities and responsibilities might lie.
Personally, I see them as peers to each other, right?
Okay.
The CIO and the CISO, because they are all at the C level and they are all peers. It doesn't matter if they're focused on technology or not. They each have a different focus. One is product, one is internal, and the other one is security overall for not just a platform, but it's the company, its employees, and customer data. So while the other two are getting, busy getting product out the door and applications out the door, the CISO's protecting those, inner workings of those environments. And it's just as big a job as the other two roles are. So, if you look at some of the job descriptions that are out there today, it's like a laundry list. And a CISO does have a laundry list of responsibilities, on them, and that's okay. So they could be responsible for data privacy or GRC, governance, risk, and compliance programs. They could be responsible for development or infrastructure or physical security, and of course, security operations. They could also be responsible for fraud related activities, right? Depending on the type of company that you're in. So there's a lot of things that the CISO is supposed to be doing. Some CISOs are very focused on one thing. You'll see job descriptions out there for, application security or just infrastructure security. And those are very siloed approaches. And, I say to companies, I do a lot of advisory work for companies, and I say all the time, if you're only focused on one pillar, then what are you doing with the rest of the company? So, if you're, let's say, only focused on platform security, well, who's watching HR and finance, right? You're basically saying that it's not important, or, you know, a lot of times those departments are left to sort of fend for themselves and they're not trained in security. They're trained in their job functions. So, I always get a little suspect when I see the siloed security um, role.
So let's talk about um, that. You mentioned job description and laundry lists, and I don't know if we can kind of put under the bigger bucket of the state of the CISO conversation. What what are you seeing as you're engaging with organizations? Do they feel they have certain areas covered? Are they struggling to cover some of the other pillars? Using that term as you mentioned,
Yeah.
um, is hiring going well? Are teams strong and robust? Um, what's kind of the general sense of things um, from your
I
perspective?
wish I could paint a really rosy picture right now, but I can't. So I know more CISOs that have been let go from their jobs. I know more team members that have been let go from their jobs. And honestly, I wish I could tell you it was role specific or gender or age or race or geographic area or some pattern, but it's not. It's across the board and it's at all levels. Um, Unfortunately, what's happening right now, which is great for the SecOps manager, they're being elevated. And again, no disrespect to SecOps because they work hard and they do a lot, but they're getting elevated to what I'm calling a band aid, which is companies are faced in an economic downturn with high inflation and probably a lot lower ARR. Um, and they're trying to fix a problem that they have perceived they're having. So if they don't want to pay for a high priced CISO, they just need to make sure that security operations is being taken care of. So they're elevating the SecOps manager to head of security. And again, no disrespect to SecOps because they do work hard, but they're unless you get somebody who's been involved in a broad range of activities, mostly their goal and their skill and expertise is in alert management and understanding what to do when a company's under attack. So it's, in my personal opinion and in my level of expertise at this point in my career, I keep saying it's the wrong picture. It's the wrong way to go about solving security. Yes, we do need to solve alerts and attacks and figure out what's a false positive and what isn't. But security is so much more than an alert. It's so much more than just a technology. It's the triumvirate, or the triad, as we call it,
Hmm.
of people, process, and tech. And the real triad that CISOs solve is availability, integrity, and confidentiality, right? CIA.
Yep.
So if we're not focused on the triad, we're missing something. And then the ability to identify and detect and respond becomes a little bit harder to do, leaving companies vulnerable to attack.
Yeah. Yeah. And I have I don't know, multi-layered, rosy colored set of glasses that I often look through when I'm on the show, because it's easy to get down into things are challenging. We don't get the support we need. We don't have the budget we need. But then I often ask my guests, well, if we think about it this way, is there a way we can change the way the business operates? Is defined, architected, built, deployed, managed, whatever, in a different way that reduces exposure, reduces risk, thereby reducing the need for some of the other downstream detection, monitoring, response, constant patching, um, fixing roles that get misused and abused. And I feel that over the last few years, those conversations have grown. It seemed that companies and people that I've spoken to find a level of maturity
Mm.
happening, or yeah, basically some level of maturity is taking place. What I'm hearing from you now, though, is perhaps we might be not yet quite taking a step back, but certainly not pressing forward on that if we are uh, not keeping CISOs on and embracing and encouraging business level conversations by putting others that are more tech oriented into positions where they now need to know the business, um, and the grander exposure that it has. So I don't know, any thoughts on the maturity level of programs given what you just said? Are we is it still possible to mature that way with some of the things you're seeing?
It is, and please don't take the message that I'm sending today as doom and gloom.
Right.
I live in a world of sunshine and rainbows. I have taken companies from nothing to something because I love transformation. I love the challenge. It's why I'm in this role. But right now, I think we've hit a pause, and I'm still trying to figure out why. And the only thing I can put my finger on is that it's the economy, right? And there's just a lot of people out there that are unemployed that are trying to do the right things. And this role, people are looking at and they're kind of shaking their head and they're saying, "Do we need it? Why do we need it?" And I've been saying this for quite a few months now, and hopefully this will resonate with some of your audience members. If we're doing our jobs correctly, then nobody really should be hearing from the CISO. Like, things are calm, cool, and collected, right? If we're doing our jobs correctly, it's almost like we're doing ourselves a disservice and we should be running around with our hair on fire, which, give me a moment to explain this. Personally, my internal measurement is if my team and myself are running around and our hair is on fire, then we're all doing something wrong. But if it's calm and cool, then we're doing something right. But no one really notices us because, well, what are they doing back there? Right? It's all quiet. This security thing's working out just fine. Look at, we're not getting breached. But what we don't do and shouldn't do is put the real metrics in front of the C level. First, their heads would explode. Second, it would lead to a whole bunch of questions that we just don't want to, have them go down that rabbit hole. But most organizations are being attacked millions of times a month. The bigger ones probably millions of times a day. And it's the one that gets through that gets all the attention, which it should. The ones that aren't getting through, it's just calm, cool, and collected. So the CISO needs to be, the relationship builder, the partner, the communicator, the educator, like I could bring all these adjectives into what we should be doing. But we really need to be there as a calm, this is just my opinion, calm, silent advisor, trusted advisor that anyone can come to at any time and say, I think there's something wrong. I've noticed, I've done, right? You want to have that kind of relationship with individuals so they're confident to call you, as well as with the C level. I can't tell you how many times a CEO has called me to say, I need to talk to you about something because we need to be the steel trap. But then we go into the organization and we work everywhere across the enterprise and we say things like, we're trying to put together a program and we do assessments based on a compliance framework. Even if you're not certifying in a specific framework like a SOC 2, SOC 2 is not a certification, but if you're not going for SOC 2 report or doing ISO 27001, the CISO should still be implementing that level of control because when we implement controls, and by the way, controls is not a dirty word, nor is process. We create some kind of structure in a non bureaucratic way that gives us a positive outcome, right? And that positiveness in that outcome leads to a better security posture and more maturity. So let me use change control as a for instance. If you have no clue who's putting items, release packages into your CI/CD pipeline, you have no idea if there's any collisions. You have no idea the timing. You have no idea if there's integration work that needs to continue from one team to the other. You have no idea who tested the code for any defect or vulnerability that may be impacting a customer. And all of a sudden, the thing goes out into release. It's the middle of the night, the platform goes down, and there's no support personnel. Who looks bad? Is it the CISO that should be getting blamed for that? Or is it somebody else in the organization? So when you have consistency in change and release management, everybody's lined up, everybody knows a release is coming, everybody knows who should be supporting it. You should know what's going into production because it should have been tested in dev and test and figured out, from a configuration standpoint in pre-prod, and it's consistent and it goes out and everybody's happy, right? Along with release notes. Don't forget release notes. So that consistency, that routineness leads to a limited amount of defects and vulnerabilities if done correctly. Otherwise, it's crapshoot. You don't know what you're getting. And it goes from being calm, cool, and collected to your hair's on fire.
Yeah. So are there any things that teams can do, assuming budgets are frozen or reducing, and let's just say the team stays intact, the CEO's not gone or CISO's not gone? Are there things they can do to remain calm, cool, collected, kind of like baseline, I don't know, actions or documentation or meetings or ways to communicate that keep things, keep a, what I'm trying to get to is kind of like a sense of culture for a good security posture, even if things get shaken up?
Yeah, I think first that every engineer should know the OWASP top 10 vulnerabilities, but hands down, right? Just even if your company doesn't have a program, just learn them because honestly, every pen test that I've ever done, it's always OWASP. It's never the network. IT's figured this out. Like they figured it out a long time ago, but it's always the OWASP top 10. So every engineer in a CTO's organization, just learn OWASP top 10. Take all those defects and vulnerabilities off the table. And then let's look at things like, champions, security champions, right? If you don't have the staff or the budget, there's always ways that you can be creative. Have I don't want to say a steering committee, but have a group of individuals that meet, that want to be there, that can help you champion sending messages down and through the organization, right? And have a security mindset. And that's not just a buzzword. It's true. If people start recognizing how to identify threats, you can actually, solve some of those problems before they start. If you can't afford, a vendor to do phishing simulations or a fancy software package, just send out information, right? If it's through Slack, email, get people in a group, go visit with teams. You can show people. It's as simple as a PowerPoint slide, right? Just go and get, examples of email phishing campaigns and show them to people, right? It's that easy, and constantly send out messages around what to look for. So every week, every day, brings about another threat. Let people know what the threat is and make sure that they have that information before it lands in their inbox and they're told to click, urgently on the following link. Upend it before it happens.
Yeah, that's also might be a good way to partner. You call them champions, but perhaps partner with HR and marketing,
Mhm.
right? Maybe somebody there has an interest, and those teams have an interest in security, and might
They
be able to
do.
help with
And
some of
they
those
they usually
communicators.
have a learning management system.
Yeah.
So, honestly, if you have no budget, it's as quirky as get a couple of your, team members in front of a camera and put together, a quick video segment on some security topic. Doesn't need to be more than 5 or 10 minutes long, and post them on the LMS, right, for people to take, or even push them out to your employees. Like one of the things that I always do when I do annual training, which should be done more than annually, I make sure it's 100%, including the CEO, right? Everybody gets to take annual training. It's something simple and easy to do that people will sometimes go, "Oh, wow, I didn't realize that that was a problem." Change your password every 90 days, right? Go to a digital, footprint. Use MFA. I know MFA is getting a lot of, fanfare these days, but it's one more layer that you can install. VPN, another one, right? That everybody, is sort of, on fire about. But, if you're working from home, you should be on a VPN, especially if you're in the financial services arena. Don't shortcut those things.
Yeah, exactly. And as we come to the end, I don't think we're going to get to some of the. We touched on responsibility a little bit. I don't think we're going to get to the liabilities part. So maybe we can have another chat on that um, in the future. But I want to use this last moment maybe to highlight some areas where you think security teams kind of need to brace themselves, because you talk about changes in the business environment, right? The economy is changing, business is changing. um, if we're letting certain team members go, we're also likely making changes in how we build products, how we interact with our customers, how we manage operations, and I don't know, pick your favorite part of the business. Everything's kind of impacted at some point, right? The first thing that comes to mind is shortcuts, using that word you mentioned a minute ago. Uh, what are some shortcuts that might be happening? What are some other areas where decisions being made on how things are done could impact security, and are there ways to kind of head that off at the pass? At least be aware so you can look for the signs that something is coming.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So, as people are getting let go, that means that the people that remain are taking on more work, which means they are going to look for shortcuts, which means, they may not be looking at access and identity management the way that they should be. They may be forgetting to terminate employees, at the end of the business day. I've heard stories of employees, being let go, and then, the CISO's not involved, right? I've also heard things where people are getting let go, but they have all day to remain in their on their operating environment, right? Nobody's the wiser because nobody's been told. There's a lot of this going on out in the industry, and that's a gap, right? So they could be taking, I'm not, not everybody does it, but some people could be taking data, right? Like we all know salespeople have a different contact list than the one that's in Salesforce. Um, so again, my opinion, every cybersecurity opening on the job, I think the last count in April was like 3.5 million. That's 3.5 million exposures across the landscape of corporate America that's ripe for takeover. So I just think that, whoever remains in security has to be more diligent about identifying where the threats exist and help those business people that remain try to plug them up as best as possible, and the use of technology will help in that regard.
Yeah, excellent point. So it's all comes back to IAM again,
Awesome.
making sure access is robust.
Yep.
Well, Sue, I feel we barely scratched the surface here, but a lot of interesting and fun things to talk about and consider. And an absolute pleasure chatting with you. So I'm
Thank you.
glad you joined me on the show, and always interested in chatting with you more. I know you're doing a podcast as well, so hopefully folks can listen to some of the things you're working on, and we'll include links to your profile so folks can connect to you there. And if you have any resources you think are relevant to this conversation, we can share those as well. So I'll put those in the show notes for everybody.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And I'm welcome to and happy to come back at any time and talk about various topics.
Perfect. And thanks everybody for listening to this episode. Hopefully you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. Certainly made me think, and hopefully did the same for you. And of course, stay tuned, subscribe, share with your friends and enemies alike. And we'll see you on the next one. Thanks again, Sue.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you learned something new and this story made you think, then share ITSPmagazine with your friends, family, and colleagues. If you represent a company and wish to associate your brand with our conversations, sponsor one or more of our columns. We hope you will come back for more stories and follow us on our journey. You can always find us at the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society.